Hello, so ysorting, the feature that creates the entire fill of your game. Here's a game without ysorting, and then the same game with ysorting. This is the feature that must be done right to make the player feel like they are really within the world you've created for them. But how do you do that? Well, today we will go over how ysorting works, then the step-by-step process to implement ysorting with both scene instances and within a tile map. And throughout this tutorial, I will be sure to share the best ysorting advice I know, along with the tips and tricks I have learned over the years. But there's a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Subscribe to help you to push this tutorial on ysorting to more aspiring game developers, and let's begin. So to get started, what is ysorting and how does it work? Well, simply ysorting is just the layering of nodes within a scene, and those nodes are automatically layered during runtime according to their Y position value. So in this example here, you can see that the layer the player and the tree are on switch based on which object is lower on the screen. Or in logical terms, the node with a higher Y value is shown in front of other objects which have a lower Y value, in turn creating this layering effect which we call ysorting, since we are just sorting objects based on their Y value. Now let's break this down even more. Look at this very simple example in the editor. We have two sprites, and they are both at a Y value of 50. If we drag sprite 1 around, when its Y value is lower than 50, it is shown behind sprite 2. But if sprite 1's Y value is higher than 50, it shows in front of sprite 2. Now that's a more logical view of everything, but hopefully you understand what ysorting is and how it actually functions. Of course, there's a lot more to go over, like origins, z-indexes, node ordering, etc. But the only way to understand that is if we actually do it together. So let's move into the step-by-step tutorial section and learn all about ysorting and how we can implement ysorting into our own projects. Okay, so now that we've made it to the tutorial section of this video, we are actually going to get to work with ysorting and learn about it and how it works within the engine. And you're going to be able to implement it into your own projects, which is of course the best part of this entire tutorial. So of course, there are some things that we need to go over before we get started, and that's basically our setup project. What do we have in our game? Well, we have a world scene, which is just a node 2D with a color rect, which I named background color, and then a player, which is instance within the world 1 scene. And the player is just, again, very simple, just an animated sprite, a collision shape, a camera, and this very simple movement script. And that's all we have. And if you want to download this project, you can download it in the link below on my itch.io page, and then you can also download the finished project down there as well, so you can follow along with this tutorial, or you could just look at the end tutorial, the final product that we create from this tutorial, and you can have both of those projects, so you can hopefully understand what's going on a little bit better, and so you can download this before project and follow along as you watch this tutorial, so you can basically do it hands-on. And then we also down here have a world 2 example scene, which is just another player and another world. And that's going to be for the second example, because here in example 1 we're going to go over the basics, and we're going to go over scene instances and how to ysort scene instances. And then in example 2 we're going to go over how to basically do everything with the tile map. So that may be your cup of tea. You may need to know the tile map. You may have clicked on this video for the tile map. So if that's true, then you can skip ahead to this timestamp on screen now, and that's where that's going to start. But for now, let's get going with the basics. Let's understand what's going on, how ysorting works, and then how to do scene instances, because that's the most basic example of ysorting that we can do, right? So to get started, let's go and understand what ysorting is and how it's actually being changed within the engine. Well, when something's ysorted, basically what's changing is the z-index number over here in the inspector. Now there's these two other options down here that you see, z is relative and ysort enabled. Ysort enabled, of course, is just going to enable its ability to be ysorted. Z is relative. I'm not going to even start explaining now, because you really need a visual example to understand what it is. And there's a very good visual example that we're going to get to when we create the tree scene, where this is going to really make sense, and it's really going to kind of click in your mind why you would use that, because it's not really used for many things, but there are some instances where it can be used and it works really well. So I want to wait till then to go over that, because so we have a visual example of what's going on and how it actually works. Because right now I would have to use my words, and I don't want to confuse you in any way, so I'm not even going to try. But we have the z-index here, and that's kind of what's important now to note. If you don't know what the z-index is, it's basically the layer that it's on. So for example, the player and the background color here are both on z-index 0. So they're showing based on how they're ordered up here. So for example, if we move the player up, you're going to see it's going to show behind. If we move the player down, you're going to see it's going to show in front. But that's just because of how it's ordered up here in the scene hierarchy. So for example, if we were to change the player's z-index to -1, well, the background color z-index is still 0. So -1 is less than 0, so it's going to end up showing behind the background color. And then maybe if we were to go and change the background color, you would see that now, since they're on the same -1 z-index layer, the player is going to show in front because of the hierarchy. And if we were to set this back to 0 and then the player back to 0, you're going to see how that works. It's basically just the layering. So if the player's on 1 and the background color is on 0, the player is going to show in front no matter the lineup it is up here in the hierarchy, because the player has a higher z index. And so when we get into the y sorting, it's going to take the transform position up here, the position.y, and it's going to base it off of that. So for example, our player is at 0 y right now. So let's say we had a tree that was sitting right here at negative 20y, right? Well, the player's z-index is going to be 1 higher than that tree because we want the player to show in front of that tree. So it's going to end up changing this z-index value here live within our game, which is going to be what creates that ysort effect, or that layering effect, because those layers are changing live during runtime. But how do we actually create this? Well, we need to have something to ysort against. So let's create a simple tree scene with a static body. We can name this tree, and we can do an animated sprite, and we can create this animation here with this right here, and you're going to see that we have this tree frame. Now, if you're following along with this tutorial, this may be a little confusing because, of course, whenever you open up this, mine was already came set up for some reason, but if you open it up, it's going to look like this. So change the horizontal to 12 and change the vertical to 5. Now the reason this looks so weird and you can't really select a tree is because the sprite sheet's supposed to be set to 12 and 5. So we would have 2 frames here, or 2 squares, which are going to make up that tree. So to do that, we have to double the size vertically, and then we have to just offset it by 20 pixels. And you're going to see that we're going to get that tree perfectly like that. And then we can save this tree scene, and then we can import we can add in a collision shape to it, just like this. Simple small collision shape down here at the very, very bottom. Come over to our world, and then we can instance this new tree scene that we just created. You're going to see now we have a tree. But if we were to click play and we were to run around, you're going to see that we are behind it. But when we go in front, we're below it. And that's not good because, again, they're on the same z-index, and the tree is in front of the player in our hierarchy. So to fix this, we can actually add in a new node. Now, I like to do this based on node because it is organization. Now, you could just make this entire back world one here a ysort, but we don't want to do that because, for example, our background color, we don't want our background color to ysort. So we can just add in a node 2D. We can call this something along the lines of our maybe environmental objects, maybe. Right? Because we can just store everything that we want to ysort within this folder here, or within this node 2D. And if we come over here to the inspector on our environmental objects node, and we just go to ordering and enable ysort, and then we go to our player scene on our player base up here at the very top, the character body, and enable ysort, and then we go to our tree on its static body and enable ysort, and then we go to our world and we click play. You're going to see that we're going to go in front of the tree, then we're going to go behind the tree, in front of the tree, behind the tree, in front of the tree, behind the tree. And there is a bit of a collision there, so that's why we're getting stuck. And you're going to see that this may look funny because, like, our player here, our feet are in front of this trunk, so we want to be showing in front. And that's based on origin. But I want to go over that in just a minute because what's important right now is this shadow. You may be like, well, that shadow looks funky. It doesn't come out like professional looking. Let me explain that. This is where that Z relative setting is going to come into play that we talked about earlier. So this sprite sheet is done by a very talented artist, a very, very good artist. And they did an amazing job on the sprite sheets, and the sprites look awesome. But the shadow here is supposed to be a separate sprite, right? And in this sprite sheet, it's not. So it's going to look a bit funny because the shadow is part of the tree, when in reality, the shadow should be a separate sprite, which you layer beneath the tree. Because, for example, if we come over here and we were to add in something like a color rect, now this is going to look really funky because I want to really get the point across to you about how it works. So it's going to be a really big shadow, right? But let's say that this is our shadow sprite, and this here would be our main tree sprite, right? Well, the shadow sprite, you wouldn't want to be part of the ysort. So to do that, you can come over here to the ordering and you can turn off Z as relative, and then you can set its Z index something behind what the player would ever be. So the player would never be on -1, right? Because its lowest Z index that it's set to right now is 0. So if we set that to -1, and everything else on our game is at 0, for example, even our tree is set at 0, it's always going to show behind it. But to do that, we need to go to our background color, and we also need to set our background color to a far back z-index, because again, our background color is never going to show in front of anything in our game. So you just make that a big number, -999 if you want to, right? But we can save this scene, save the tree scene, and you're going to see that we have our shadow here. If we were to play, our tree is y-sorting, right? So we can go in front of the tree, and then we can go behind the tree. But do you see how the shadow never switches? The player never goes behind the shadow. And so that's what you really need for this green piece down here. But in this sense, we don't really have that because the shadow is connected to the tree, so we can't make this effect. So it's going to look like the shadow overlaps the player at some points, which again isn't ideal, but this is a tutorial, so it is fine. So if you are working in your own game though, and you do have a tree sprite and you have a shadow, make sure you make those separate sprites, because then you can give it this effect that we have with the black square. Because, for example, if we did not do that effect there, and we were to leave everything as is, under the tree, basically this would be what we already have, where this is part of the sprite. It's the same idea, right? Because if we come back, you're going to see that that black is going to overlap our player at some points, which, again, is not good. So, yeah, again, that's where that Z is relative could come into play and could be handy for you. And I wish we could do that on this tree, so we don't get that little glitch or that little overlap with that shadow down there at the bottom, because again, we want to be on top of that shadow. But for this tutorial, it is fine, and we're not going to stress about it too much, but because hopefully now you understand how you can go about that in your own game if you are creating that. But another thing that I want to mention is that whenever we are, for example, right here, you see that our player switches right about there. Now, maybe you want it to switch there, maybe you don't. But for example, if I'm standing here, I would feel like I would want to be in front of the tree, because you see where our feet are, and you see where the stem is, or the trunk. We want to be showing in front of the tree at this point. And the reason that that's happening is because of our origin. So we can go and change our origin. For example, this here in this example, it isn't too bad, but in some examples it may be horrible because of how the origin is set up. So to change that, we can come over here to our tree, and you see that this here is our origin, this tree piece. So basically, if our player goes above this piece here, it's going to sort. It's going to sort. And because it's taking the Y position from here. So for example, our player is taking the Y position from its eyeball, and our tree is taking the Y position from the center. So basically, you see that this line here and this line here, if the player goes to here, it's going to be in front of the tree. If it goes here, it's going to be behind the tree because of the way that these two origins are lined up. So to fix that, we can offset stuff. So for example, our tree, we want it to organize by the trunk. We want it to y-sort by the trunk. So if you're behind the trunk, then you want to be behind the tree. If you're in front of the trunk, then you want to be in front of the tree. So to do that, we can come up here to our animated sprite. We can change the offset a bit, and that looks good. And then we can set our collision shape at the same position as that, so 0, 0. And you're going to see how that looks. So now we're going to be sorting from the trunk. Now our player, again, we want our player to be sorting from its feet. So to do that, the same exact thing, we can go to our animated sprite. We can go to the offset. We can offset it by however many. That looks good. And then we can change our collision shape's position back to 0, 0, like that. And you're going to see that now our player's origin is at its feet, and our tree's origin is down here at its stem. So now we're going to basically switch based on that. So if we were to click play, you would see that behind, in front, behind. And it does still come back a little funky looking, doesn't it? Okay, so I caught our error. On our animated sprite, we actually changed our position here. And that is a no-no, because that's going to mess up the origin, because it was 3 pixels lower than it should have been. So, for example, it was set to 3y, so it's going to end up, I mean, if we go back, you're going to see, it was set to -3y. So it was set right here, and you see where the origin is. The origin is at right here on these brown pixels, right? So if we come back over here, you see where that's sorting. You see this pixel here and this origin, that's where it's being sorted from because of that position. So if we come over here and we set the position to 0 and we change the offset to -10, we're going to get the same effect, but we're going to have that origin down here at the very, very bottom. So if we go and click play, you're going to see that that is a much better sort there. And of course the shadow is going to look a bit funny, but we can't really worry about that. And you see that that is now where they sort together, is at that origin line. So a little error there, but everything has came out great, and that looks good. So now we have this tree and we have this player who can run around this tree in all sorts of different directions. Now, another thing that I want to mention is that you can organize this even more. So for example, let's say that in your world you had multiple of these trees, right? So let's say you had 4 trees, right? And it's going to get messy in the environmental objects. So something that you could do is you could add in a node 2D here, and you could name this your, for example, trees that we have. We have all these trees in our world. We can turn on ysorting on our trees node, and then we can move all these trees within this trees node. And if we click play, you're going to see that you're going to get the same exact effect. So in front of the tree, behind the tree, behind the tree, in front of the tree, and so on, right? And everything's going to ysort just like it should. And all those trees are going to ysort. And then let's say, for example, you had more items, because in a world you're not just going to have trees. So let's say you had a rock as well. So we can create a simple rock scene real quick. It'll take very quickly. So boom, new sprite frame. We'll create this new sprite frame. It should be 12 by 10, offset 0. And then we can take this rock's frame. We can add in a collision shape, right? And we can come up here, make this collision shape look nicely on it, just like this. And then the origin is already pretty nice. We don't really need to mess with the origin, so we'll leave that as it is. We can save this rock scene, come over here to our world. We can add in a new node 2D into our environmental objects. We can name this our rocks, and then we can end up adding in our rocks, right? Our rock scenes. So we can move a rock here, and then we can move a rock here. Then we can move a rock here as well, and then so on, right? And you can see that all these rocks are organized. Let's make sure we go to our node 2D on our rock node 2D and enable ysorting. But you can see that our rocks and our trees are all now organized in these folders. So we know where our rocks and trees are, and then of course we have our player. And if we were to click play, you're going to see that just that quickly the rocks are now going to be working as well. So we're behind the rock, we're in front of the rock, and so on. And for example here, we're going to be behind the rock but in front of that tree, behind this tree but in front of these rocks, just depending on where our Y location is. And you can see that everything does come together very nicely. And that is kind of what I wanted to go over here within the first example, because this is the basics. This is kind of just what you need to know, what's in the inspector, how the z-index works, how the z-relative works, and then the ysort, of course, which is basically taking that position and putting it in front or behind based on the y position from the origin. And then I also want you to take from this section this organization system here, where you have a node 2D. You don't want to make your world, a lot of people make their world 1 here, and they'll make that ysort, and everything in the world will be ysorted, because ysorting is pretty universal and it's going to be throughout the entire scene. But I really recommend you create an environmental objects and then put ysorting on that, so then everything that you do want ysorted can be under that. Because you may have things up here that you don't want ysorted. You're going to have UI. You're going to have things of that matter that are going to be within your world scene. You may have a world 1 setup node, right? And you don't want that stuff to just be classified and be ysorting at during runtime, because that doesn't really help you at all. So I recommend creating this node 2D environmental objects and then putting everything that you want within that, and you can organize it from trees to rocks, buildings, whatever it may be that you have. You can organize it very neatly here, and it's all going to work out, and it's going to come out just like we have here. And that's, I think, is the best way to go about it. But hopefully you were able to learn the basics in this section. But now I want to move into the TileMap tutorial, because that may be what you came here for. A lot of people have a lot of questions about the TileMap, because it's simple to set up, but it's hard to perfect on the TileMap, because you have to change like the origin, you have to change the texture, you have to change all this different stuff within the TileMap's tileset settings. So I want to move into that now. Let's go over ysorting with the TileMap, and then I want to go over some important information that I want you to keep in mind as you're working with ysorting in the future, and as you go about creating ysorting in your own projects once we finish with the TileMap tutorial section. So let's move into that now and get started with the TileMap. Okay, so now that we're in our TileMap example, let me kind of go over what we have here. So we have a node 2D, which is our world 2. We have a node 2D, which is just a folder for our TileMap layers. And then we have a player, right? And then the player again is the exact same player with just a different camera. Everything's the same on this player except for the camera. As you can see that we have a limiting on the camera and we have a zoom on this camera, and that's the only difference. And basically this tile map that we already have. So if we were to click play, again, there's no ysorting or anything enabled. There's no collisions. There's just this world that we have here, right? And to go about ysorting, we actually need objects to ysort. So we're going to need another tile map layer. So we can add on to our tile map layer that we already have. So we can say tile map layer here. And then this layer is going to be the thing that's going to store our trees and our rocks and our whatever we want to store, right? Whatever you're going to have that's going to be ysortable, we will store it on this environmental layer. That's what we'll call it, just because that's what we called it in the last example. And we need to go create a new tile set. And on this tile set, we can use from the Taga folder this resource art set. And then we can say, no, we don't want to automatically create the tiles, because if we come down here and look, you're going to see that these tiles, we're going to have some tiles that are 2 tiles big, right? So we need to create those ourselves. Now, if you know how to work a tile map, you can skip this part because this is just the basics of a tile map. But if we click on these, you're going to see that these are going to create tiles. And we can create all these because they're all one-offs, right? It's just one tile. But these up here, we need to shift and then drag to create a bigger tile. So these are all 2s, these are 4s, and then these are 2s. And then this is going to be just 1 because these are all going to be part of the same exact tile. But like this is, for example, if you want to create an animation tile, this is how you would do it. So columns, there's 5 different columns here, right? And then there's going to be 5 different frames, so we can add in all those elements. You're going to see that's going to be a tile. There's something I want to go over that's really going to affect ysorting, and it's this orange square that you see here. So this orange square is the texture origin. So it's the origin of the texture, it's how it's placed. So for example, if we take this tile here and we go to the tile map tab over here so we can paint these tiles, and we paint these like this, right? You're going to see that they all line up perfectly. If we were to put a tree in here though, you see that it's offset from these because when we place a tile, it's placing it based on this orange. So you see that this orange square here perfectly aligns with this here, right? So this is probably where the orange square is at here. So it perfectly aligns. So this tree is now hanging over into this tile, and it's also hanging over into the tile below it. So to line all this stuff up, we need to create the texture origin, and we need to fix the texture origin, basically line everything up so everything lines up at the same exact bottom, so it all looks like it is in a grid together and not offset like this. So to do this, we can come over here to paint, and you're going to get all these different options and just select on texture origin here, and you're going to see 0 0. Everything's already set at 0 0, right, because it's the center of its tile. But for example, here we need to move the y-axis down by, or we need to move it down on the y-axis by 8. So if we click that, you're going to see exactly how that just fixes it up here at the front. And this exact setting is going to be done on all of our ones that are too tall, because you can kind of see how that affects it and how it pushes it to the bottom now. So anything that's too tall, this is going to work for, including our campfire over here. The ones we don't have to mess with because it's just a full tile and it's already right smack where it should be, right? And then, for example, this one here, we would have to, since it's 4 wide, we need to move it on the x-axis as well. Because if we didn't move it on the x-axis, it would just move it straight down. So we need to move it -8 this way as well. So it puts it in the bottom left, and then we can do that for all the ones that are 4 wide. And then if we come back over here to paint, you're going to see now everything is going to end up lining up together, right? And it's all going to look like it fits together, which is good. So that's kind of how you go about the texture origin so that our tile map actually looks right. But when you're ysorting, you also have to worry about the ysort origin, because that's where the individual tiles are going to be ysorted from. So if we go back down here to our tile set tab and we go to paint, you're going to see that if we drop this down, we have a ysort origin right here. It's that simple, right? It's like right here in the same spot. And this is going to be changed the exact same way. So currently on all these items, the ysort origin is where this blue is. Where this little crosshair is. So if we were to, for example, move it -3, you're going to see that's going to move it up. So if we move it +2, because it's moving it on the y-axis. So for example, that's where we want our trees to sort. So we can set all of these basically at that spot, because that's going to fit. And that's almost going to work for all of our tiles that are too tall, or 2 tiles tall, except maybe this one, maybe we want that one to be a little bit up because it's a chest, maybe even one higher. But you need to play with this and just get it to the location. For example, this one right here, the thing, I want to give you a tip here as well. You don't have to worry about it being in the middle, because when we're worried about the Y sort, we're just worried about the Y. We don't care about the X. The X doesn't matter based on the sorting. It's not going to sort it based on the X axis, so you only have to worry about the Y. So all of our chests, we want to sort at the exact same spot for the most part, right? So we can set that up like this. This, we want it to maybe sort even lower than that, right? Maybe at 0. All these look fine. That looks actually really good. The campfire, maybe we want that to sort a bit higher. And then these rocks are all fine. They look good. The trees here, these little guys, they need some work for sure. Now, they're so small you're not even going to be able to tell that they're being Y-sorted, but they do need some work. So we'll go maybe 3 on all of these, because that looks like it's at the stem. Maybe not on these top ones, though, because they're all positioned at a different point, right? So we can, on maybe these, put it at 2, maybe even at 1, to be honest. That looks good. And then, for example, this rock here, this is going to be a big guy, so we need to move that up a lot. Maybe we want that to start Y-sorting around there, right? Somewhere around there. And you're going to see that this is the Y-sort origin, so you only have to worry about it on the Y-axis, not the X-axis, just to keep that in mind. And now we're going to Y-sort from this crosshair, so that looks good. Now, if we come back to our tile map and we were to end up putting in some trees, right? Let's put in a bunch of trees here, because they're all going to end up now Y-sorting like they should. And then maybe let's put in a big old rock. Let's put in some smaller rocks. Let's put in this sign. Let's put in a campfire. Let's put in whatever it may be. Let's put in a chest here, right? All this stuff is now going to Y-sort. Let's put in some other trees as well, like this, right? So now we have a little world set up, and everything should Y-sort, right? Because we set everything up. Well, no, because we haven't set everything up. We've set up all the background things that are going to help our Y-sorting, but we haven't actually enabled Y-sorting. Now, the thing is, with a tile map layers, this is what tile map layers have came in so handy. They're really handy for Y-sorting. So in Godot 4.3, they ended up adding in tile map layers, and they're so beneficial for Y-sorting that it's unreal, because instead of making our entire tile map a Y-sort, we can create a separate node, just like we did over in example 1, because we can come up here and say, okay, well, let's create a node 2D, and let's create this to be our Y-sort layer, or our Y-sort objects, we'll just call it for this example, right? In a real game, you would probably want to call this something else, but for now, we can drag in our player, and then because we have different layers on our tile map, we can drag in this environmental layer down into our Y-sort objects, and it's going to be a complete, so basically we just split our tile map into 2 different layers, right? Which it already was, but you know, maybe 3 months ago we couldn't even do that, so now it's really beneficial here. And then we can move this into a Y-sort, and then so we can come over here into the ordering, and we can turn on the Y-sorting for the whole layer. We can go to the player, of course, turn on Y-sorting for the player, and then for this objects here, we can come and we can turn on Y-sorting for the entire node. So everything under this is going to be Y-sorted within this Y-sort objects folder, right? So if we click play, you're going to see what happens. This entire tile map layer is now going to Y-sort, which is absolutely amazing, right? So our campfire there is actually a bit messed up because we ended up putting in that first frame, which maybe we didn't want to do because that's the off frame, but it is fine. And you can kind of see how everything does come together though. The entire tile map layer works. Now we don't have collisions, so we can just walk through everything, but you can see that whenever we're walking, like for example behind this rock, we're behind the rock, now we're in front of the rock, and then now we're like behind the sign but in front of the tree all at the same time, right? So it's really cool, and you can kind of see how simple that was, how easy that was to create Y-sorting, because now every time we want to go over here and add in a tree, we can just click on a tree and we can add this in different spots on our map. And you're going to see if we were to click play, that tree is automatically going to be part of our game, right? So it's automatically going to Y-sort. So basically anytime we add in a new tile within this tile map layer, it's automatically going to Y-sort with every other tile and with every other item in that scene, which is Y-sortable, which is so beneficial. And that's why tile maps are really the way to go when you're working with Y-sorting, because you can kind of see over here in example 1, when we went over this, it's a bit confusing and it takes up a lot of space in the hierarchy. But there are some things which are going to need their own scene, which are going to need to be sorted, and that's why it's important to understand how to do that. But for example, over here, you may be like, well, we don't have collisions. Well, collisions are just something that you can set up within the tile map. And I've actually created an entire tile map tutorial on this a while back. So if you do want to go over that, it goes over everything tile map related besides the ysorting. So that's why we're creating this today. But if you want to go check that out, I'll leave a card to it on screen right now. But we have a physics layer here. We can create this over here in the tile map layer. We can go to paint, properties, physics layer, and then we can click on what we want to paint. So for example, we'll just create the tree collisions for now. But you can kind of see that you do this, and then you can click on that tree, and then that's going to be a collision, and then you would go to this tree, you would change it up if you want it changed, and then you would click on that, and then so on, right? And then you would have collisions on your trees now. So if we click play, you're going to see that this tree is now going to have some sort of collision. Now that was a very messy collision I created, so it's not going to look right, of course, but we do have collisions on those trees now. I mean, so that's basically everything you should know about tile maps, but there's one thing about this example that we just created that I do not like, and I want to clarify that, because it doesn't explain to you how important organization is and how you would actually use organization, because down here we just have two items. We have a layer and we have a player, and that's it. But over here in the world 1, I stressed how important this organization through nodes was, and I just want to show you how you would do that, for example, in world 2. So we have our tile map and everything's done within our tile map. Yes, that's right. But there's more that we need, right? Because, for example, in a game, you're not just going to have a tile map and a player. You're going to have enemies. You're going to have NPCs. You're going to have whatever it may be. So real quick, I'm going to go create an NPC, and I'm going to show you how you would implement that within this and keep everything organized, just like I kind of stressed how important that was over here in this example. Okay, so I just created this rock head NPC, and I created this mushroom head NPC right here. And let's make sure that we turn on ysorting on these guys as well, real quick, just like that. And then we can come over here to our world 2. How do we want to go about this? Well, we need to create a node 2D, right? Now on this node 2D, we can basically store our NPCs within this node, and we can turn on ysorting within that node, and then we can instance our rock head NPC, and then we can instance our mushroom head NPC, right? So you would want to instance them within this folder. We can move them around. For example, mushroom head will be over here. So you can kind of see how ysorting is already working. Then we can put the rock guy by the rock, right? Then we click play, and you're going to see that these guys should automatically be walking around and moving around, and they go behind the tree. This one's going in front of this chest. You can see that they interact with the player. So if I go between like this area, you see I'm in front of the tree but behind him. Now we do have collisions on, and the collisions are very messy, so if the collisions look weird, that's why. But you can kind of see how everything is coming together here and how everything works, how the NPCs also are going to ysort. Basically that's showing if you have, for example, 10 enemies in your game, they're all going to ysort within the tile map as well, as long as you have it within this ysort objects node, and then you can order those like this. So now we have our NPCs, and then maybe we would have, for example, another node 2D, which would be for our enemies, and so on. And I just wanted to kind of clarify that before we end off the tutorial. But other than that, I think that's everything covered. And again, if you do have any questions, please ask me in the comments, because no question is a silly question. All questions are good, and I would love to help you out, because I really do want you to understand this, because understanding ysorting in Godot is so important. Understanding ysorting in any game development engine is so important, because it's the layering. It's actually what puts your player into the world and not just your player on top of the world. So you really need to make sure you understand it. So I really do want you to understand it. So ask any question that you have, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Okay, so that is the end of today's tutorial, and we went over a lot. I mean, in example 1, we went over everything that you need to know, the basics of ysorting and how to implement it within a simple project like this, where we just have different scene instances. And then we went over in example 2 how to do it within a tile map, and how to basically sort the tiles all within a single tile map layer, and then how to adjust the origin and everything like that, so that everything sorts the way it should at the spot that we want it to sort at, if that makes sense. And then we went over organization, because that's so important, but node organization with different nodes. And I know this looks just like folders, but these do sort. Everything under this ysort objects sorts, because on our NPCs node, we also have our ysorting enabled, right? So everything's enabled there. and it all works together and it comes together. But it's important to understand how you need to set up these nodes so everything can work together within your scene and everything sorts the way you want it to sort. But if there's 3 things that I could tell you that I want you to walk away from this video knowing, it's to really understand the z-index and why it works, how it works, understanding the node organization up here in the hierarchy, and how you implement that with ysorting. I cannot express that enough, because when you get into a more complex game, you're really going to need to understand that. Like really need to understand that. So make sure you learn the basics now, so that when you do move into a more complex example, you understand how to do it. And then understand TileMap ysort origins, and understand the transform origins for scene instances, right? Because those are the origins, and that's how things are sorted. That's the position at where things are sorted. And then again, for certain instances, there are things like with our tree, when we went over our shadow earlier, where you need to understand what z as relative means, right? But again, hopefully you were able to understand what went on today, and you are able to take some value away from today's tutorial. And thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you were able to learn something. Until next time, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to get back to you. But stay safe and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. God bless, and bye-bye.